But we're going to begin with two of my colleagues who have covered McCain for decades. Joining me now from Chicago is Tom Brokaw, and here in Washington is my friend Andrea Mitchell. Tom, you had the last interview that anybody at NBC conducted with John McCain. Let me play a pretty poignant response when you asked him, are we going to be okay? Here's what he said.
Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Without American leadership, I'm not sure we're so well off. But could I also say, I believe in America, I believe in its people, I believe in the folks in Arizona. I am not a pessimist about the future. I still think we're still a shining city on a hill.
Tom.
Well, I'm sitting here in Chicago, and one of the reasons I'm here is not just to appear on Meet the Press, but tomorrow to look back on what happened in the city 50 years ago. It was the Democratic Convention, which was more a riot than it was a convention. We lost 15,000 people in Vietnam that year. We had Dr. King killed and Bobby Kennedy assassinated. When I asked John about the difference between then and now, he said it was much worse then. The thing about John was that he was always authentic in what he had to say. He could be very self-critical very quickly. We got along extremely well for a while, and then he got angry with me about what was never quite clear. But then he came to me about 2 years ago and said, look, I was wrong. We've got to get back to square one again. I don't know another politician who could talk like that. His friends included, for example, Tom Daschle, who was Democratic leader of the Senate, and people like Lorne Michaels, who's the producer of Saturday Night Live. So I think that we're missing that in our public life these days, the kind of authenticity that he brought to the arena.
You know, Andrea Mitchell, Mark Salter, his longtime aide, sort of a son from another mother and father in some ways. This is what he wrote in the Washington Post this weekend. McCain was a romantic about his causes and a cynic about the world. He had the capacity to be both things and to live with the contradiction. He had seen human beings at their best and worst, often in the same experience. He understood the world as it is, with all its corruption and cruelty, but he thought it a moral failure to accept injustice as the inescapable tragedy of our fallen nature. He was realistically optimistic, I guess.
And that optimism, that shining city on the hill, that you know, of course, we think of Ronald Reagan. I think Michael Beschloss said last night that if the happy warrior had not been coined to describe Hubert Humphrey, that John McCain would be the happy warrior. And a warrior and a fighter always, but always with so much optimism and so much joy and passion. Passion because he believes so much in his country, in the people of our country. And he believed in a greater vision of America. You
know, Tom, every generation has this handful, and it is literally a small handful, of people that don't become presidents, but become bigger than life. John McCain is one of those people. Patrick Moynihan was probably best representative of the generation previously. How did he achieve that status in your mind?
Well, I think you achieve that by sailing against the winds that are prevailing. For example, now, on both parties, they're more ideologues than they are authentic people in terms of looking at a problem, not just through the prism of being a Democrat or a Republican, but what is really needed to be done. And John McCain would do that. He was not trapped by his party label. I mean, he was very conservative on international affairs, but willing to take a look at domestic programs from a different perspective. We don't have that much anymore in politics. You know, I grew up at a time when in both parties, they got along, even though they had different ideologies, but they had in the Senate, the giants of the Senate on both sides. And now we have everybody trapped into this kind of ideological box. Whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, you can't move out of that box. I think the country is tired of that.
Andrea, I want to read you John Kerry's statement because it invokes a great memory of yours. Here's John Kerry's remembrances. We met 32 years ago. We loved the Navy, but had opposite views about the war of our youth. We didn't trust each other, but really, we didn't know each other. After a long conversation on a long flight, we decided to work together to make peace with Vietnam and with ourselves here in America. We traveled together to Vietnam, and together we found common ground in the most improbable place. I stood with John, the two of us alone, in the very cell in the Hanoi Hilton, where years of his life were lived out in pain, but always in honor. Tell me about that trip.
That trip and the fact that they would stand there together. John McCain did not respect or understand or trust, as John Kerry acknowledges, what John Kerry did after the war. Being one of the leading, when his first appearance on Meet the Press was as a protester against the war. But they worked together, and I was covering the POW commission that they created together. And as John Kerry wrote in that tribute last night, he was savaged by lesser people, but that words could never hurt him because he was stronger in the broken places, in the words of Hemingway, of course, who was the great literary hero that John McCain loved so much. John McCain, with John Kerry, helped Bill Clinton, who was an accused draft dodger in the '92 campaign, normalize relations with Vietnam. It's hard for some younger people perhaps to realize how bitter that was, how much they had to pay in a political price, but together they gave these two veterans, and John McCain, of course, the POW, gave Bill Clinton in 1995 the political cover to actually normalize relations with our former enemy.
Tom Brokaw, there is at least 70 people that are nominees for the United States Senate this November. There's going to be a lot of remembrances of John McCain this week. A lot of people are going to read about moments of John McCain that they're just learning about. Half of those people are going to be coming back to the U.S. Senate. What lessons do you hope they take away from what they learn about John McCain's life this week?
That there's something greater than the party label, that there's something greater than a kind of ideological, if you will, an ideological attachment to whatever the mood of the day is, that you have to look at the needs of the country. And the needs of the country are not just the domestic issues, but where we stand internationally, and have the courage, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, to take a stand against what you know is not the best interest of the country, but it happens to be the ideology of whoever's in the White House at the time. We need more people who will sail against the winds. I just want to say one thing quickly.
Yes, sir.
I went to Hanoi and stood in that park and looked out on that lake where he landed after he'd been shot down, terribly injured. And I had seen those pictures of him being almost savaged to death in that lake. And then he went through 5.5 years. John McCain, before all that, had been kind of a playboy flyer, and it changed his life. And he was very honest about it, and to go through that kind of an ordeal and come out of it wanting to help the entire country, not just a narrow base, I think that's a big, big lesson.
Sure is. That's quite the example. Tom Brokaw, Andrea Mitchell. Thank you both. One person who shares a common bond with John McCain is Hillary. Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and then click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.